I stood frozen in the doorway, mud from my gardening boots staining the pristine marble. Inside the penthouse I had sacrificed everything to build. My husband was on one knee, sliding a massive blue diamond onto my cousin Sienna's finger. Then Aunt Verna stepped from the shadows, took a sip of expensive wine, and delivered the final blow. "Stop hiding it, Julian," she commanded coldly. "Tell her the truth. My name is Alara Blackwood, though for the last 5 years, I had foolishly called myself Ilara Vance. The hurricane warning had canceled the landscape project in the suburbs early, sending me driving back into the city through sheets of gray rain. I entered the penthouse at Skyline Tower, my boots caked in mud and my cheap canvas bag soaking wet, looking like a beggar in my own home. I stood frozen in the foyer, water dripping onto the Italian marble I had spent weekends polishing, staring at a scene that shattered my reality. In the center of the living room, bathed in the warm glow of the crystal chandelier, my husband Julian was on one knee. He was holding a velvet box, and inside it sat a blue diamond ring that cost more than I could earn in a decade. But he was not looking at me. He was sliding the ring onto the finger of Sienna, my cousin, the girl I had raised and protected like a sister. "Julian." "What are you doing?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my throat. They both froze. Then, a slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the hallway. Aunt Verna stepped out from the shadows, swirling a glass of vintage red wine. She looked at me with the cold, dead eyes of a shark. "Stop hiding it, Julian," she commanded, taking a languid sip of her wine. "Tell her the truth. Tell her she was just a sacrificial pawn in this family's game." Julian stood up, brushing the knees of his bespoke suit as if the floor I cleaned was beneath him. The look of love on his face vanished, replaced by a sneer of absolute disgust. "It is over. Ilara," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I needed a wife with a squeaky clean record and local residency to secure the zoning permits for the Nexus project 5 years ago. You served your purpose. Now that the company is public, I need a partner who fits the image, not a laborer." "But 5 years," I stammered, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. "I worked double shifts so you could build your prototype. I gave you everything, and that is all you are good for." Julian spat, interrupting me. "You are a dirt digger, Alara. That is all you ever were. A architect of mud." He kicked a suitcase that was sitting by the sofa toward me. "Your things are packed. Get out." Sienna giggled, snuggling into Julian's side. She rested a hand on her stomach, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Don't be too sad, cousin. Julian needs an heir, not a barren mule." "Maybe if you hadn't worked yourself into the ground like a peasant, your body wouldn't be so broken. But don't worry, my baby will have the best daddy in the world." The cruelty of her words hit me harder than a physical blow. They knew my infertility was a result of the stress and exhaustion from supporting them. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through my veins. I ignored the suitcase and lunged toward the fireplace mantel. My grandmother's old wooden box sat there, the only heirloom I had brought into this marriage. Verna moved faster than I expected. She snatched the box and dangled it over the roaring flames of the gas fireplace. "This ugly trash ruins the aesthetic of the room." "No!" I screamed, panic seizing my heart. "Give it to me!" I threw myself at her, wrestling the box from her manicured claws just inches from the fire. I clutched it to my heaving chest, backing away. "Security!" Julian barked. 2 burly guards rushed in. I recognized them. I had baked cookies for their children. Now, they grabbed my arms without a second of hesitation. They dragged me across the floor, past the smirking faces of my family, and shoved me into the elevator. Moments later, I was thrown onto the wet pavement outside the lobby. I lay in the mud for a moment, the cold rain mixing with the hot tears I refused to let fall. I pushed myself up and looked at the golden light spilling from the penthouse window far above. "Enjoy your champagne," I whispered to the storm, my voice shaking with fury, "because I will make you pay for every single tear." I climbed into my rusted pickup truck. My hands trembled as I tried to start the engine. When I tried to book a room at a decent hotel, my card was declined. Julian had already frozen our joint accounts. I drove to the outskirts of the city, finding a motel that charged $40 a night. The room smelled of mildew and stale smoke. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, shivering in my wet clothes, I opened the wooden box. I just wanted to see my grandmother's photo, to feel a connection to someone who had actually loved me. My fingers traced the velvet lining, but something felt wrong. The bottom was uneven. I pressed down on the corner, and a sharp click echoed in the silence. A false bottom popped up. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. For 5 years, I had carried this box, and I never knew this secret compartment existed. The scent of cedar and dried lavender drifted from the open compartment, instantly transporting me back to the porch of the farmhouse where I grew up. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, raspy and stern as she looked out over her overgrown garden. "Land doesn't lie, Ilara. Only people betray the soil. Remember that." I had always thought she was speaking metaphorically about gardening, but as I pulled out the contents of the secret drawer, I realized she had been speaking literally. Inside lay a thick, yellowed folder and a heavy object wrapped in velvet. I unwrapped the object first. It was a seal carved from cold, green jade, intricate and ancient, depicting a hawk clutching an oak branch, the crest of the Blackwood family. I had seen this symbol before, etched faintly on the stone gate of our old farm, but I never understood its weight until I opened the folder. My hands trembled as I turned the brittle pages. My grandmother was not the poor, eccentric farmer everyone thought she was. The documents identified her as the sole trustee of the Blackwood Land Trust, an entity that held title to 60% of the land in the city's newly developed technology district. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp rush. I flipped to the map attached to the deed. The massive plot of land marked Parcel A was the exact location of the Skyline Tower. The sprawling acreage labeled Parcel B was the construction site for Nexus Tech. Julian had built his entire empire on my land. I read on, my eyes scanning the fine print until they landed on a clause highlighted in red ink. "Full management rights and ownership shall transfer to my granddaughter, Ilara Blackwood, upon her 30th birthday, or immediately upon the dissolution of her marriage, should said dissolution be caused by the moral or legal fault of her spouse." A dry, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. Julian had discarded me to secure his future, not realizing that by betraying me, he had just handed me the keys to his kingdom. I looked at the clock on the bedside table. It was 3 a.m. Beside the documents was a business card, cream-colored with gold lettering, Arthur Sterling, Sterling and Partners. Without thinking, I dialed the number, expecting a voicemail. "Sterling speaking." A crisp, alert voice answered on the first ring. I am sorry to call so late," I stammered, gripping the phone tightly. "My name is Ilara Blackwood." The silence on the other end was heavy, charged with electricity. "For a Blackwood," the man replied, his tone shifting from professional to deeply respectful. "It is never too late. I have been waiting for this call for 20 years. Where are you, Miss Blackwood?" The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gray. I put on the only other clothes I had in my truck, a black suit I used for client meetings, slightly worn at the elbows but pressed and neat. I walked into the lobby of Sterling and Partners, a glass fortress that screamed old money. The receptionist looked down her nose at my scuffed boots until Arthur Sterling himself, a silver-haired man with eyes like polished steel, came down to the lobby to greet me. "Welcome home, Miss Blackwood," he said, bowing his head slightly as he ushered me past the stunned staff and into his corner office. He poured me a cup of tea in delicate china, treating me not like a cast-off wife, but like a queen returning from exile. He opened a laptop and turned the screen toward me. "I have been monitoring the trust as your grandmother instructed," Sterling said. "You should know the current situation regarding the tenant. Nexus Tech. Julian Vance is 6 months behind on his lease payments. He has been dodging my calls for weeks." "He is broke," I asked, frowning. "Leveraged to the hilt." Sterling corrected. "He is currently petitioning for a 99-year lease extension. He needs that long-term land security to satisfy the banks. Without it, his loans will be called in. He has mortgaged everything he owns, including the penthouse you lived in, to fund the new Eco City project." I looked at the numbers on the screen. Julian was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and he had just pushed the only person who could save him off the ledge. "He thinks he is the king of this city," I said softly, tracing the rim of the teacup. "He thinks he can throw me away like trash." "We can evict him tomorrow," Sterling offered, his finger hovering over a keypad. "One command from you, and I lock the gates to Nexus Tech. We can seize his assets to cover the back rent." I shook my head slowly. The pain of last night was still raw, a gaping wound in my chest, but the fire of vengeance was cauterizing it. An immediate eviction was too quick, too merciful. I wanted him to build his tower of lies higher, so the fall would be fatal. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Do not reveal that I am the owner. Not yet. Tell him the trust is willing to negotiate the extension, but we need to execute a specific strategy." "What is your instruction?" Sterling asked, pen poised over his notepad. "Operation Noose," I whispered. "Let us give him enough rope to hang himself. Mr. Vance signed the lease renewal 20 minutes ago." Arthur Sterling's voice was smooth over the phone line. "He was so eager to secure the land for his investors that he did not even read the addendum. Clause 42, regarding the moral character and ethical conduct of the tenant, is now legally binding." I sat in my small motel room, highlighting names on a spreadsheet. Good. He thinks he has won 99 years of security. In reality, he just handed me the trigger to his own execution. While Julian was busy popping champagne corks, Aunt Verna was busy burning bridges. I learned through my old neighbors that she had sold the Blackwood ancestral home, the house my grandfather built with his own hands, to a foreign developer. She liquidated our history to pay for Julian and Sienna's wedding of the century. It was a gamble. She was betting every last cent on Julian's success, believing his new status would elevate her into the social stratosphere she had always craved. I did not stop them. Instead, I used the Blackwood Trust's liquid assets to go shopping. I did not buy clothes or cars. I bought debt. I approached 3 small regional banks that held Julian's initial startup loans. They were nervous about his over-leveraging, so when a private trust offered to buy the bad debt at 90 cents on the dollar, they eagerly sold. By the end of the week, I owned $4 million of my husband's liabilities. I also hired a private investigator, a man who charged $200 an hour and produced results worth every penny. He found the paper trail I suspected existed. Julian was funneling company funds through Sienna's boutique event planning agency to avoid taxes. It was clumsy, arrogant money laundering. Meanwhile, the world hailed Julian as the new King Midas. The press release for Eco City promised a billion-dollar sustainable paradise. Sienna graced the cover of City Elite magazine, draped in silk, with the headline, "The Muse Behind the Genius." I read her interview in the checkout line at the grocery store. Julian needed someone who could match his vision. Sienna had been quoted saying, "His previous partner was, well, she was just a placeholder, a simple girl who liked to play in the dirt. We are building a legacy." I tossed the magazine into the trash. "I am not playing in the dirt," I muttered to myself. "I am digging your grave." 2 days later, I was back on the construction site of the Eco City, but not as Alara Vance. I was there as the lead representative for Green Horizon, a shell company I had set up under the trust. I wore a battered yellow hard hat pulled low over my eyes, a neon safety vest stained with grease, and a face mask to protect against the dust. A sleek black limousine rolled onto the muddy site. Julian and Sienna stepped out, looking like royalty visiting a leper colony. Sienna wrinkled her nose at the smell of wet earth, lifting her dress hem as she navigated the puddles. "Where is the foreman?" Julian barked, not even looking at me as he checked his gold watch. "I don't have all day." "I am in charge of the landscape architecture," I said, pitching my voice lower and keeping my head down. I held out the blueprints. Julian snatched them from my hand. "Look, I want the entrance to be majestic. The investors are coming in 3 weeks. It needs to look expensive." "We could plant native oaks," I suggested, testing him. "They are resilient and symbolize longevity." "Boring," Sienna interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "We want something exotic, something that screams money." I pointed to a section in the catalog. I had prepared a section filled with plants that were notoriously fragile and completely unsuited for our climate's soil acidity. "We could import golden Himalayan cedars. They cost $5,000 each. They are rare and visually stunning." Julian's eyes lit up at the price tag. 5,000. That sounds impressive. Do it. Order 50 of them for the main avenue. "Sir," I said, hiding a smirk beneath my mask, "the soil here is very wet clay. Those trees usually require dry conditions." "Are you questioning me?" Julian snapped, stepping closer. His polished shoe sank into the mud, and he recoiled in disgust. "I am the visionary here. You are just the hired help. Your job is to dig holes and put things in them. Do not pretend to understand aesthetics." "Julian, don't waste your breath on these people," Sienna sneered, looking at my muddy boots with disdain. "Just get the expensive trees. We need the photos to look perfect for the opening." "As you wish," I said, bowing my head submissively. "I will order the golden cedars immediately." They walked away, hand in hand, stepping over the very land that was plotting against them. They had no idea that the expensive trees they just ordered would suffer root rot within a month in this heavy clay, turning their majestic avenue into a row of dying, brown skeletons right after the warranty period expired. I watched them get back into their limousine. "Planting the seeds of your destruction," I whispered, "is the easiest job I have ever had." The invitation arrived in a heavy cream-colored envelope that reeked of Aunt Verna's cloying perfume. Inside, printed in gold foil, were the details for a gala to celebrate the future, which was really just a glorified debutante ball for Sienna as the new Mrs. Vance. Hand-scrawled on the back of the RSVP card was a note from Verna. "Come see what a real woman looks like. Try not to embarrass us." I smiled. It was an invitation to a slaughter, but they did not know who the butcher was. I took the Blackwood Trust corporate card, a sleek piece of black titanium that felt cold and heavy in my hand, and went to the most exclusive atelier in the city. I did not look at price tags. I pointed to a mannequin wearing a floor-length gown of emerald green silk, the exact shade of the jade seal in my grandmother's box. "I need this fitted by 5 this afternoon," I told the sales associate, "and book your best makeup artist." When I stepped out of the hired limousine in front of the Grand Hotel that evening, the flashbulbs blinded me for a second. I was not Alara the gardener anymore. My hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, my lips were painted a deep crimson, and the emerald dress flowed around me like liquid money. I walked into the ballroom, and the chatter died down instantly. Heads turned. I heard whispers rippling through the crowd. "Who is that? Is that the heiress from Monaco? I heard she is a silent partner from Europe." I saw Verna and Sienna near the champagne tower. Sienna was wearing a white dress that looked like a wedding cake explosion, tacky and excessive. When she saw me, her jaw dropped. Verna's eyes narrowed into slits. They started marching toward me, signaling for security. But Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the city's largest bank, intercepted me first. "My dear," Henderson said, taking my hand, "I do not believe we have been introduced. Your entrance was quite commanding." "Elara," I said, offering a mysterious smile. "I represent a private land trust. We are watching the Eco-City project with great interest." Verna arrived at my side, her face purple with suppressed rage, but she froze when she saw Henderson. She had to swallow her venom and force a grotesque smile. "Elara," she hissed through gritted teeth. "I did not think you could afford the bus fare. Investments pay well, Auntie," I replied smoothly, turning back to Henderson. "I was just telling Mr. Henderson that I heard some troubling rumors about the zoning permits for the new project. It would be a shame if the legal title to the land was disputed." Henderson frowned, pulling out his phone to make a note. "Disputed, I was told the land was secure." I drifted away before Verna could explode. Moving through the crowd like a shark in a koi pond, I planted tiny seeds of doubt in every conversation. Legal issues, unstable soil, ethical violations. I felt a hand on my waist, a familiar hot breath against my ear. "I haven't seen you before," a male voice purred. "A woman like you shouldn't stand alone." It was Julian. He was drunk on his own ego, prowling the room for his next conquest, assuming I was some foreign investor he could charm. I turned around slowly and looked him dead in the eye. "Hello, Julian." His face went pale. He stumbled back as if he had seen a ghost. "Elara, you look expensive." I finished for him. He grabbed my arm and dragged me behind a heavy velvet curtain, away from the prying eyes of the press. His charm evaporated, replaced by the ugly bully I knew too well. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled, squeezing my arm hard enough to bruise. "If you are here to beg for money, I will have you thrown in the gutter where you belong. You are nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." I did not flinch. I tapped the screen of my clutch purse, stopping the voice recorder app I had been running. "Careful, Julian," I said softly. Threats sound so ugly when played back for a judge. Before he could react, the curtain was ripped open. Sienna stood there, her face twisted with jealousy. She saw Julian holding my arm and assumed the worst. Without a word, she threw the contents of her wine glass at me. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of my emerald gown, dripping down the silk like blood. The music stopped. The entire room gasped. Sienna smirked, feigning shock. "Oh, I am so clumsy. But really, that dress was a fake anyway. Just like you." I looked down at the stain, then back at her. I did not scream. I did not cry. I smiled. "Thank you, Sienna," I said, my voice calm and carrying through the silent room. "You just helped me decide the color I will paint the walls of your office building after I take it from you." I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I slapped it against Julian's chest. "A subpoena," I announced. "Since you forgot to finalize the asset division, my lawyers have frozen the transfer of your personal properties. You can't sell the penthouse to fund your project. Julian. Not until a judge says so." I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their perfect evening. As I waited for my car, I checked my phone. 3 notifications from the stock market news app popped up. Rumors of legal troubles plague Nexus Tech. Investor confidence shakes as mysterious source questions Eco-City land rights. Nexus Tech stock down 4% in after-hours trading. The party was over for them. Mine was just beginning. The collapse happened at dawn on a Tuesday. The heavy irrigation system required to keep those expensive Himalayan cedars alive had turned the clay soil beneath the main plaza into unstable sludge. The ground buckled, swallowing 2 construction cranes and cracking the foundation of the main atrium. The damage was estimated at $3 million. But the damage to Julian's timeline was incalculable, Desperate and bleeding cash, Julian ran out of options. The traditional banks had shut their doors to him after I bought up his bad debt, so he turned to the sharks. He reached out to a private venture capital firm called Nemesis Capital. He had no idea that Nemesis was a shell company I had registered in the Cayman Islands less than a week ago. While Julian scrambled for cash, Aunt Verna cornered me in the parking lot of the hardware store where I was buying supplies. She slammed a document against the hood of my truck. "Sign this," she hissed, her eyes wild with stress. "It is a waiver of all remaining marital assets. If you sign it, I will give you $10,000 to leave town." "And if I don't?" I asked, leaning back against the rusty metal. "Then I will have you committed," Verna threatened, stepping closer. "I have spoken to Dr. Evans. He is willing to testify that your infertility drove you mad, that you are paranoid and dangerous. Who do you think the judge will believe, the respected philanthropist Verna Blackwood or the barren ex-wife living in a motel?" I let my shoulders slump, feigning terror. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, keeping it low. "Aunt Verna, please. You wouldn't do that to family." "Family," she laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You were never family, Ilara. You were an investment that failed to yield a return. Now sign the paper, or you will spend the rest of your life in a padded room." I need time to think," I stammered, making sure my voice trembled just enough. "You have 24 hours," she spat, turning on her heel. As she drove away, I stopped the recording on my phone. I sent the file immediately to Arthur Sterling. "Add this to the pile," I texted. That pile was growing rapidly. My private investigator had found that Sienna was not just a squatter in my life. She was a parasite. She had siphoned $200,000 from the construction budget under consulting fees to buy jewelry and designer handbags. When the investigator sent the photos of her latest shopping spree, I told Sterling to hold off on releasing them. "Let the cancer spread," I told him. "If we cut it out now, Julian might survive. We need the infection to reach the heart." Julian, blinded by panic and Sienna's lies, walked right into the trap. He met with the representative from Nemesis Capital that afternoon. The terms were predatory. The interest rate was 25%, compounded weekly. But the kicker was the collateral clause. In the event of a default or a significant breach of financial protocol, Nemesis Capital would seize 100% of Julian's shares in Nexus Tech. He signed the contract without even consulting a lawyer. He was convinced that the EcoCity opening would generate enough revenue to pay off the loan in a month. The moment the digital signature cleared, I called Sterling. "Execute the surprise audit clause in the loan agreement." The next morning, auditors from Nemesis descended on the Nexus Tech offices. Julian tried to block them, but the contract he had signed stripped him of that right. While his office was being turned upside down, he held a press conference outside the crumbling construction site. I watched it on the small television in my motel room. Julian looked tired, his perfect tan fading, but he flashed his signature smile. "The rumors of structural failure are completely false," Julian lied smoothly into the microphones. "We have encountered minor soil adjustments, which is standard for a project of this magnitude. In fact, we are so confident that we are proceeding with the grand opening ceremony tomorrow as planned." An hour later, a courier knocked on my motel door. He handed me a silver envelope. It was an invitation to the grand opening of the EcoCity. A handwritten note from Julian was clipped to the front. "Come and sit in the front row. Ilara, I want you to have a front row seat to watch me win. You are the guest of honor." He wanted to parade me in front of the cameras, to show the world that his crazy ex-wife was just a spectator to his glory. He wanted one final humiliation. I tossed the invitation onto the bed next to the jade seal and the thick stack of legal documents Sterling had prepared. "I will be there, Julian," I said to the empty room, "and I am bringing a housewarming gift." I picked up the deed to the land, the piece of paper that proved every inch of his empire stood on borrowed ground. Let us see who is winning when the landlord comes to collect. Before the final blow, I needed to understand the root of the poison. I drove 3 hours out of the city to the overgrown estate where my grandmother used to live. The house was empty, but the caretaker's cottage still had smoke rising from the chimney. Elias, my grandmother's loyal butler for 40 years, opened the door. He looked frail, his skin like crumpled parchment, but his eyes were sharp. "I knew you would come," Elias rasped, ushering me inside. He went to a loose floorboard under his rug and pulled out a leather-bound book. "Your mother's diary. She hid it here before she passed. She knew Verna would burn it." I sat by the fire, reading the faded ink. The words unraveled a lifetime of lies. Aunt Verna was not my blood relative. My grandparents had adopted her when she was 10, hoping to give a friend's orphan a home. But Verna had never felt gratitude, only envy. The diary detailed how Verna had manipulated my mother on her deathbed, tricking her into signing a document transferring 50% of the estate to Verna. "But it was all for nothing," Elias said, pouring me a cup of bitter tea. "Your mother had already filed a will with the state the day you were born, leaving everything to you. That signature Verna stole. Worthless." I closed the book, a cold chill settling in my bones despite the fire. Julian was not the mastermind. He was just a greedy, handsome tool Verna had sharpened and pointed at me. She had spent her entire life trying to steal the Blackwood name and fortune, and when she couldn't take it from my mother, she groomed Julian to take it from me. I drove back to the city with a new clarity. I decided to offer one mercy, not for them, but to speed up the collapse. I texted Sienna, asking for a meeting at a small cafe near the Nexus Tower. She arrived wearing huge sunglasses and a coat that cost more than my truck. She sat down, looking bored. "Make it quick," Sienna said, checking her manicure. "I have a dress fitting for the opening gala." "I know you are cooking the books?" "Sienna," I said quietly, sliding a napkin across the table. "I know about the shell companies. I know you are stealing from Julian." Sienna froze, then let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "You are bluffing." "Give me the real ledgers," I offered, leaning in. "Turn on them. Testify against Verna and Julian. If you do, I will make sure you stay out of prison." Sienna sneered, her face twisting into an ugly mask of arrogance. She picked up my business card, the fake one for the landscape company, and ripped it into tiny pieces. "You are just jealous," she spat, standing up and causing her chair to scrape loudly against the floor. "I am going to be the queen of this city tomorrow, and you will always be a nobody." She stormed out. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of calm. I had tried. An hour later, the first domino fell. My contact at the bank texted me the update. Julian had just tried to access the corporate operating accounts to pay the caterers for the gala. Access denied. "What do you mean, frozen?" Julian was screaming into his phone as I walked past the glass front of the Nexus building on the sidewalk. I could see him pacing in the lobby, his face red. The bank representative, acting on the instructions of Nemesis Capital, informed him that due to a breach in the credit terms, specifically the unauthorized asset dissipation caused by Sienna's theft, the entire loan principal was due immediately. Verna was in the jewelry district. My investigator sent me photos of her walking into a high-end pawn shop. She was selling her last few pieces of diamond jewelry, her status symbols, to float Julian for just 24 hours. She was convinced that once the ribbon was cut on the Eco-City, the investors would flood them with cash. That evening, I stood on the rooftop of the building directly across from the Nexus Tower. The wind whipped my hair around my face. Below me, workers were setting up a massive stage. Spotlights were testing their beams, cutting through the night sky. A huge banner with Julian and Sienna's faces hung from the steel beams of the building that sat on my land. It looked magnificent. It looked expensive. It looked like a tomb. The end has come, I whispered to the wind. Tomorrow, the ground takes back what is hers. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy smog hanging over the city, casting a sickly yellow light onto the glass facade of the Nexus Tech Tower. I sat in my rental car across the street, watching Julian pace back and forth in his office window. I pressed send on a burner phone. Inside that office, Julian's phone buzzed. Through my binoculars, I saw him pick it up, read the message, and practically drop the device. I knew exactly what it said. Congratulations on your final day as CEO. Enjoy the view while it lasts. While Julian was sweating through his silk shirt, Aunt Verna was in the dressing room backstage, managing her own crisis. Sienna was standing in her underwear, trying to adjust a foam pad over her flat stomach. The pregnancy was a lie, a fabrication they had cooked up to garner public sympathy and trap Julian, but he was too stupid to realize it. "Stop fidgeting," Verna hissed, slapping Sienna's hand away. "You need to look radiant and maternal. If that pad slips during the broadcast, we are finished. Do you understand me? Smile and rub your belly when the cameras are on you." "But I am scared. Aunt Verna," Sienna whined, her voice trembling. "Julian is acting crazy, and I have a bad feeling." "Feelings are for poor people," Verna snapped. "We have $1 billion empire to secure." Across town, the atmosphere was very different. I walked into Arthur Sterling's office. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock. On the mahogany desk lay a single document, the writ of execution for possession of real property. "Everything is in order," Sterling said, his face grave. "The sheriff is waiting downstairs with the private security contractors. Once you sign this, there is no going back. We are effectively declaring war." I picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink flowed black and permanent as I signed my name. "I declared war 5 years ago. Arthur, today is just the surrender ceremony." Back at the Eco-City site, chaos was blooming like a poisonous flower. The sound system kept emitting high-pitched screeches, and the massive LED screens were flickering intermittently. I had asked a former colleague, an electrical engineer who owed me a favor, to make sure the technical glitches were subtle but maddening. "Fix it," Julian screamed at a terrified technician, his voice cracking with hysteria. "We are going live in 2 hours. If that screen flickers one more time, I will fire every single one of you." A delivery man walked onto the chaotic stage, holding a massive arrangement of white lilies flowers typically reserved for funerals. He placed them right next to the podium. Julian ripped the card from the bouquet. I could imagine the blood draining from his face as he read, "With deepest sympathy for the passing of Nexus Tech." He kicked the flowers over, stomping on the delicate petals in a blind rage. In the dressing room, a scream pierced the air. Sienna had just unzipped the garment bag holding her custom gown. The dress was in tatters, the silk slashed into ribbons. My plant inside the catering staff had done her job perfectly. "My dress," Sienna shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "Someone cut it! I can't go out there!" Verna grabbed Sienna by the shoulders and shook her violently. "Shut up, pull yourself together, wear the backup dress. Nobody ruins this day for me. I have the mayor and 3 senators coming. No one can touch us." Verna truly believed that. She believed her social connections were a shield that could deflect any arrow. She did not realize that the ground beneath her feet was already gone. Outside, the stream of limousines began to arrive. The paparazzi were swarming, flashbulbs popping like distant gunfire. The city's elite, the big shots and power players, stepped onto the red carpet, unaware they were walking into a crime scene. I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my white suit. It was stark, sharp, and immaculate. I walked down to the street where a car was waiting for me. It was not my rusted pickup truck. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, jet black with the Blackwood family crest on the door. The driver opened the door for me. I slid into the leather seat, the smell of old money and power enveloping me. "To the Eco-City, Miss Blackwood?" the driver asked. "Yes," I replied, looking out the window as the city began to blur. "Drive straight to the stage. It is time to close the show." Julian stood center stage, bathed in a spotlight that made his tan skin glow. He gripped the sides of the lucite podium as if he were anchoring the entire room with his confidence. He looked every inch the visionary billionaire he pretended to be. "Eco-City is not just a collection of buildings," Julian declared, his voice smooth and hypnotic, echoing through the high-tech surround sound system. "It is a testament to a new era, an era built on the bedrock of transparency, integrity, and unwavering business ethics. We believe that to build high, one must have deep, clean roots." I watched from the shadows of the entrance, a cold smile touching my lips. The irony was so rich it nearly made me laugh. I signaled the technician in the booth with a single nod. Precisely as Julian uttered the word ethics, the world went black. The stage lights cut out instantly, plunging the cavernous ballroom into a sudden, confused gloom. A collective gasp rippled through the audience of 300 VIPs. Then, the massive LED screen behind Julian, which had been displaying a loop of a utopian green city, flickered and died. A split second later, it roared back to life, but the serene blue and green branding of Nexus Tech was gone. In its place was a stark, blood-red background. In the center, towering and imposing in pitch black, sat the hawk clutching the oak branch, the ancient crest of the Blackwood family. A piercing electronic alarm, the sound of a high-level security breach, shrieked through the auditorium, causing investors to cover their ears and drop their champagne glasses. Then, absolute silence. The heavy double doors at the back of the hall swung open with a theatrical crash. I stepped across the threshold into the beam of a single spotlight that my team had rigged. I was flanked by Arthur Sterling on my right and the chief of police on my left, with a dozen uniformed officers and private forensic accountants trailing behind us like an army. I was not the woman Julian remembered. I was not wearing muddy boots or a stained flannel shirt. I was dressed in a tailored white suit that cost more than his car, sharp enough to cut glass, with stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. Julian stood frozen on the stage, his mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. The microphone slipped from his sweaty palm and hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback that made the crowd wince in pain. Aunt Verna jumped up from her front row seat. Her face was a mask of panic and fury, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the terror in her eyes. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Get that woman out of here. She is a trespasser. She is crazy. Do something." Two of the venue's private guards took a step toward me, but the chief of police simply raised a hand. They looked at his badge, then at the confident stride of the woman in white, and they stepped back into the shadows. They knew who held the real power in this room. Arthur Sterling walked past the stunned guests, ignoring the whispers that were starting to rise like a tide. He climbed the stairs to the stage, picked up the fallen microphone, and dusted it off calmly. He looked out at the sea of confused faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Sterling said, his voice level and authoritative. "My name is Arthur Sterling, legal counsel for the Blackwood Land Trust. I am here to enforce an immediate eviction order." He turned to look at Julian, who was trembling so hard he had to grip the podium to keep from collapsing. "Pursuant to Clause 12 of the Commercial Lease Agreement regarding the moral character and financial solvency of the tenant," Sterling announced, his words echoing like a gavel strike. "The landowner, Ms. Ilara Blackwood, is officially exercising her right to revoke all land usage rights effective immediately. Nexus Tech is trespassing on private property." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then, as if on cue, Every camera in the room swiveled away from the stage and pointed directly at me. The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm, blinding and relentless. I walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me. I did not look at them. My eyes were locked on Julian. I climbed the steps to the stage. I stood next to him. He looked small. He looked terrified. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd, his eyes darting around for an escape that did not exist. "Please, we can talk about this. Don't do this." I took the microphone from Sterling. I looked at the live broadcast cameras, ensuring the entire city was watching. Then I turned slowly to face the man who had thrown my luggage into the rain. "You once told me I was nothing but a dirt digger," I said, my voice magnified, filling every corner of the room. "You threw me out because you said I ruined your perfect image." I took a step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "Well, Julian, you were right about one thing. I am a gardener. And when a gardener sees rot infecting the roots, she does not ignore it." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I am here to dig up your rot and expose it to the sun." "She is delusional," Julian screamed into the dead air, sweat dripping down his forehead as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Do not listen to her. She has been off her medication for years. She is trying to sabotage a billion-dollar investment because she is bitter about the divorce." Arthur Sterling did not waste breath arguing. He simply pressed a single key on his laptop connected to the main projection system. The massive screen behind us, which Julian had used to broadcast his lies, shifted instantly. It displayed a series of high-resolution bank statements and emails. The headers were undeniable. Wire transfers labeled zoning board bribe and soil report falsification appeared in giant font for the entire room to see. "That is a forgery," Julian yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. She photoshopped those Sienna, watching her future dissolve in real time, couldn't take the pressure. She let out a feral shriek, her eyes wide with madness. "You witch! You ruined everything!" She kicked off her high heels and lunged at me across the stage, her fingernails hooked like talons ready to tear at my face. A burly private security guard intercepted her before she could get within 5 feet of me. He grabbed her arm to restrain her, and she thrashed wildly, fighting him with the strength of a cornered animal. In the violent struggle, the delicate silk strap holding her secret in place snapped. The large foam pad, her miracle baby, slid out from under her dress. It bounced onto the stage floor with a hollow, pathetic thud and rolled toward the edge of the platform. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. 300 pairs of eyes, along with every camera in the room, zoomed in on the piece of cheap beige foam lying on the black stage. "A pillow!" a reporter shouted from the front row, his voice filled with disbelief. "The air is a pillow." Aunt Verna, seeing her master plan unravel in the most humiliating way possible, clutched her chest. She let out a theatrical moan. "Oh, my heart!" she cried out, collapsing into her front row chair, though I noticed she was careful to land softly on her fur coat. "You are all liars," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through the shock. "But let us hear the biggest lie of all." I held my phone up to the microphone and hit play. Aunt Verna's voice, sharp, cruel, and unmistakable, boomed through the speakers from the recording I had made in the parking lot. "You were never family, Ilara. You were an investment. Julian is just a tool. A handsome face to sign the checks while I run the show. He is an idiot, but he is my idiot." Julian stopped struggling. He looked at the foam belly on the floor. Then he looked at Verna, who was miraculously recovering from her faint to try and sneak toward the exit. "You," Julian whispered, looking at Sienna with horror. "There is no baby." Then he turned his gaze to Verna. "And you." I was just a tool and idiot. Mr. Vance, the chief of police, stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy metal handcuffs from his belt. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding massive credit fraud and embezzlement filed by Nemesis Capital. Nemesis? Julian blinked, looking at me, his face pale as a sheet. That is me, too, Julian, I said softly, as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. Sienna started screaming. She pointed an accusatory finger at the man she had sworn to love 5 minutes ago. It was him. It was all him. Sienna wailed, tears streaming down her face as she backed away. I didn't know anything. He forced me to spend that money. He made me wear the pad. I am a victim here. I am just a girl. The room erupted into chaos. Investors were shouting into their phones, screaming at their brokers to dump Nexus tech stock before it hit zero. Guests were tripping over each other to get to the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. I turned to the head of my security team. Clear the building. Seal the doors. From this moment on, this is Blackwood property. Anyone remaining on the premises after 10 minutes will be prosecuted for trespassing. 2 officers grabbed Julian by the arms and began dragging him toward the side exit. He stumbled, his expensive Italian shoes scuffing the floor he thought he owned. He twisted his neck around to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with tears and a pathetic, desperate pleading. Elara, please. He choked out, the arrogance completely gone. I am sorry. Help me. We can fix this. I still love you. I looked at him, at the man who had knelt in my living room and given my ring to my cousin. I felt nothing, no anger, no love, just the cold indifference of a judge delivering a final sentence. Goodbye, Julian, I said, turning my back on him to watch the screen where the Blackwood Hawk still looked down on the ruins of his empire. 1 month had passed since the lights went out on Julian's stage. The skyline of the city looked different now. The gaudy, flashing neon sign of Nexus Tech was gone, dismantled piece by piece. In its place, modest bronze lettering above the entrance read Blackwood Botanical Research Center. It was no longer a monument to greed, but a sanctuary for science and nature, just as my grandmother would have wanted. Justice had been swift and unyielding. The courts did not look kindly on white-collar criminals who defrauded pension funds. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He lost everything. His assets were seized to pay back the creditors. His reputation was shredded, and his friends evaporated like mist. Sienna did not fare much better. Without Julian's money or Verna's protection, she was hunted by debt collectors for the credit card fraud she had committed. My private investigator sent me a photograph yesterday. It showed a woman with unwashed hair in a stained yellow uniform, pouring coffee at a truck stop diner 3 counties over. She looked 10 years older, her eyes dull and defeated. But the hardest fall belonged to Aunt Verna. The shock of losing her social standing, her home, and her pride had triggered a massive stroke just 2 days after the gala. She survived, but the damage was permanent. She now lived in a state-subsidized nursing home on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint and the smell of boiled cabbage, the exact kind of place she used to mock. I went to visit her one last time. She sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at a brick wall. One side of her face drooped, and her hands, once manicured and adorned with rings, lay limp in her lap. When I walked in, her eyes widened. There was recognition there, and fear. "Hello, Aunt Verna," I said softly, standing over her. She tried to make a sound, a guttural noise trapped in her throat. Huh. I leaned down, close enough so she could see the peace in my eyes. "Do you remember what you said that night in the penthouse you told Julian to tell me the truth?" Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over onto her papery cheeks. "Well, I told you the truth too," I whispered, my voice calm. The truth is that no one can build a castle on a foundation of sand and lies. It will always collapse. And now, you have to live in the ruins. I placed a single white lily on her lap, not out of malice, but as a final goodbye to the toxicity she represented. I walked out of that gray room and stepped into the sunlight, leaving the heavy burden of my past behind me. I did not keep all the money I recovered. I established the Blackwood Grant, a full scholarship program for students studying agriculture and landscape architecture who came from impoverished backgrounds. I wanted to ensure that the next generation of dirt diggers would have the respect and resources I never had. That evening, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the former Nexus building. I had ripped out the concrete helipad Julian had installed and replaced it with a living garden. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth. I knelt down by a large ceramic pot in the center of the garden. In my hands, I held the wooden box my grandmother gave me. It was safe now. Beside it sat a small, sturdy oak sapling. I dug my hands into the rich, dark soil, feeling its coolness against my skin. This was the exact spot where Julian had once kicked over my plants in a fit of rage. I placed the sapling into the earth and packed the soil around its roots. It was small, but it had deep roots. It would weather storms. It would survive. I stood up and walked to the edge of the parapet, looking out over the city lights that twinkled like fallen stars. I had not chosen violence. I had not chosen cruelty. I had chosen to let their own actions be their undoing. I am not just a gardener anymore, I said to the vast open sky, a smile touching my lips. I am the master of the garden of my life. Thank you so much for listening to my story to the very end. Please leave a comment below, letting me know where you are listening from, as I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you all. Please remember to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach and inspire even more people.